Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, What Will You Do After Your PhD? First of all, I would like to introduce your speakers for today. So I'm Tracy Warbrick. I'm Head of Education and Scientific Communication here at Brain Products. So I'm very pleased to be bringing you this Brain Products Academy webinar today. We have three guest speakers for you today. Hopefully you can learn a lot from all of them. So we have Dr. Chris Madan. He's an assistant professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Nottingham. And Chris will give you an overview of what he's learned from editing his two books on careers after a PhD. Then we have Dr. Michael Schubert, who is our product manager here at Brain Products, and he will be giving you some insight to his role here and his career path in industry. And then we have Dr. Shirley Lim, and Shirley is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And Shirley will be giving us some insight on her career so far in research. So I hope you'll agree that we have an excellent panel for you today, and we're looking forward to their insights. So I just want to give you a little bit of information on the GoToWebinar platform in case you haven't used it already. So you are all in listen-only mode, you're muted, and that's for our speakers' comfort so you don't interrupt them, but it's also for your privacy so we can't listen into anything that's going on in your lab today. The audio settings can be adjusted in the settings tab. I know if you're having audio issues, you won't be able to hear me, but hopefully you can see this tab and go to the right place to fix your audio problems. You will receive messages from the workshop team in the messages pane that you can find here. We do have a reactions button, and we're happy for you to use that throughout the webinar. It's nice to get feedback from you. But we would ask that you don't use the raise your hand function. We will have quite a lot of people online today, and so it will be quite difficult to take questions spontaneously on the fly. You can customize your views in GoToWebinar. So if, for example, you're on a small screen, you can zoom in and out, and you can also choose whether you see the videos or slides. We're really hoping that this is going to be an interactive webinar. We really want to answer your questions and give you some good information for your own career paths. And you can ask your questions via the questions tab in GoToWebinar. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the live Q&A, and I will be the moderator for that, so I will be putting your questions to our panelists, so please type them here. In some cases, we might reply directly to you, and you will find those replies in the questions pane as well, in the same place that you asked your question. So really, that's all that I have to tell you today. I would then hand over to Chris, who would be our first speaker for today, and Chris will give you an overview of what he's learned from editing his two books. So Chris should be getting the presentation rights, and then we will leave Chris to it. So this always takes a little bit of time. Okay, looks like we're there. Okay, over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll tell a little bit right now about what I've learned from interviewing a bunch of people that have all done a PhD in psychology or neuroscience, or things that are kind of broadly relevant to the sort of background that you probably have, and talk about where different kind of possibilities of where they've gone and where you might want to kind of consider for yourself. So at least how I kind of came to this, I work at a university, I supervise PhD students, and not that long ago, I was a PhD student and then a postdoc myself, and I've considered different kind of career paths, and at least part of at least how I set up this talk at least then is when there's, I'll just say, different occasions where you meet up with family and friends and kind of go back from kind of when you're being a PhD student, then there's probably a bunch of questions that you get asked. Some maybe like the ones over here. But what we're going to focus on for now's sake is this one over here. What will you do after? So regardless of how many years you are in a PhD, or if you've moved on in a postdoc, or wherever you are in your kind of overall career progression, that probably feels like a daunting question. So what I've come to do first was kind of to inform my own PhD students, and then thought to make something more out of it really, is to see in what kind of options exist. So if you want to stay in academia, the number of kind of positions that are there that are posted on different job sites are not enough to match everyone who wants to stay in academia. Um, Also, there's other issues of, let's say, kind of traveling and mobility. If you have to uproot your life and go somewhere else, I guess I'm in the UK now. This is the fourth country that I've lived in. That doesn't work for everyone, depending on what kind of other responsibilities you might have. For instance, caring for a parent, or I guess two body problem of figuring out what to do with like partner and how your both jobs kind of work out. So then comes to, let's say, non-academic positions. Obviously, like considering more possibilities just gives you more options. But what are they apart from just saying that they exist? And you definitely have, or it depends on where you're in your progression of career. There are skills that you're learning that can be used outside of academia to varying degrees of how it kind of fits with academia. So across two books now that I've published, I've interviewed 53 people. The first book, I guess I'll switch to that side, was a mix of people in academia and those that have left. And otherwise, the second book, because it was more nebulous in some sense, was to solely interview people who have left academia. And left is very loosely used here. And then to figure out what are the options. So across those two now, I have 53 interviews, which I think maybe is now in a sense too many. But how do you know what's relevant to you? Because they're probably not all equally relevant. So one thing that I've come to do then is basically do a qualitative analysis. I do also do EEG and psychophys and all of that too. But through this project, really, I've come to do some qualitative analysis to categorize the different types of job paths that I've come across here into something that makes it a little bit more of a guide of like, okay, where can you start looking things up? So this recently actually just got published in Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology, effectively the paper around this figure that I'll be incrementally showing you. And that is here, I guess hopefully this is basically what you already know for sure. If you stay in academia, some positions are more research focused, some positions are more teaching focused, and then there's non-academic ones. The size of the different bars and kind of box things here is not based on in the real world the prevalence of these different types of jobs. It's kind of proportionate to the people that I've interviewed. So I intentionally was trying to have a relative range of diversity. And for instance, there probably are more teaching focused positions than research focused ones, but that's not who I interviewed. Now, trying to get to the part that maybe will be more kind of useful in some sense, let's explore what are some of the non-academic positions, at least in again, a categorical kind of way. Some of them are more what I call academic adjacent, and effectively it's still being part of the overall academic community. And some of them are more, you're using more general skills of, let's say, project management or data science in a different context and basically not interacting with the same academic background that you had initially, or in some sense, any kind of formal academic community anymore. Now, within this academic adjacent, I group things into, I guess, these three overall categories. The top one here I call research infrastructure. That's ones that are very much still part of academia itself. So some people, after their PhD and maybe a postdoc, worked at different funding agencies or worked at organizations that basically promote getting research to happen. So, for instance, at different research societies. Some people worked at companies that kind of, or even let's say within a university, in ways that support researchers. So, for instance, some people I know and interviewed here made their own kind of, founded their own company and then do workshops on like how to design figures and how to do qualitative research. Some people work in universities, but more in a section that's called like the graduate school or researcher academy, or in a role that's meant to support PhD students in a later generation, at least then. Some people are in more technical roles, so let's say software development for making behavioral experiments. So, for instance, at Nottingham, you may have come across a program and an overall platform thing called PsychoPie that was made by someone at Nottingham, and their office is in the psychology building here for that spin-out company. In other instances, there's a software called Gorilla. I guess I've interviewed people that work at both of those companies, and those on kind of count as more interpersonal or technical, depending on what role you have, let's say, within those companies, but basically supporting researchers to do their work. And then what I more explicitly call research support, with again kind of workshops and that sort of thing, is more in that one. Some people go more outreach in the sense of to the actual community. For instance, reading research papers and like working in more of a government position and advocating for different policy kind of things to be kind of added. So they have to have good scientific literacy, but they're not doing research themselves anymore. In other cases, maybe more science communication to the general public. And then across, separate from all of those is industry research. So working at a company and doing research for them. So for instance, working at like doing research on like medical or therapeutic kind of research, where it's you're employed by a company, not a university, but still are otherwise very much doing research studies, maybe with smaller samples, but collecting a lot of rich data, and otherwise again doing research just in a different setting. And then, as I've kind of mentioned already, there's a skill transfer group that I've put at the bottom here, where it's not so much that you're still, say, part of the academic community, but you're definitely still using some of the skills that were accrued during a PhD in a different setting kind of here now. So I guess those are, at least as a bird's eye view, some of the things that I've come to as different broader paths that you can come into from doing a PhD. And then otherwise, I guess I should have put on this link, or sorry, on this slide. But if you go to this website that I've listed here, worldbeyond.ac, I have a link to that paper, a link to the books, as well as for that figure, this diagram of all the different career paths, which specific interviews align with each of those categories. So instead of having 53 interviews to go through, you can focus on the subset that are more relevant to your interest in that sense, or also some other topics that I've singled out, such as people who talk about family considerations in how their job kind of journeys went, or talked about, like, I guess a common thing that comes up when leaving academia is that kind of loss of identity that might go with that, feeling that you're giving up a thing that you've committed to so much. Some of the interviews talked about those topics as well, and then those are singled out as which chapters to look at. So I guess I'll leave that for now, and then we'll come around to questions a bit later. So I guess that's all for me for now.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for the overview. It's really interesting to see the proportions of people doing different types of jobs after their PhD. Okay, so now we have Michael on screen. So he will give us a little bit of an insight into his current job and career path at Brain Products. So over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Hello to everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Michael, and I'm sitting here in my office at Brain Products as now head of the product management department. Let me talk a little bit about how I got here. So I have a degree in medical engineering, in sports medical engineering. And already found my, I would say, even passion for EEG and signal processing during a practical term I did abroad down in Australia. I did a quick detour topic-wise and dived into upper limb prosthetics for my final kind of master's thesis. We called it diploma at the time. To then go back to EEG, basically doing a PhD at a sports medicine institute. And there we were trying to understand the consequences of injuries in sports on brain processes. And then, of course, the effect on the performance of athletes. So quite an interconnection between all the topics I did before already. And my thesis itself was about implementing brain connectivity, EEG measures to see those performance-related effects in the brain. What I found then was maybe, I don't know if Chris would agree, but maybe something in between those first bifurcations that we saw on this graph, because with that engineering background and after quite some time spending for my PhD project at university, I think it came rather natural to me to look for an opportunity in industry. And what I did, I was looking around in my lab, basically, looking where do all these tools come from that I use and enjoy using during my PhD, which enabled me to do the research. This is how I got to Brain Products, basically, and started in a position in a scientific support team, which is basically helping our users to operate our analysis software. But also beyond that, I would say the scientific support team at Brain Products does a lot more, and I was able to use my expertise in signal, e.g., signal processing, quite a lot. We also were involved in the development of the software and so on. So I would say it was still very related to the work I did before in my lab. A lot of signal processing content, but it also opened up my view on the whole field in neuroscience and EEG research specifically. Then after 3 years, I moved into product management. And now I'm here since a little bit more than a year, leading a team of 3 persons in product management at Brain Products. And what we do is we're responsible for the success of our products, not only software, but also all the hardware equipment. For one, of course, for the company, but definitely also for our user base and for our customers. And what helps me today in my position is still knowing what it feels to stand in the lab, to plan a study, to do the experiment, also to clean up after the participants were there. So to know the whole story, what it means to do the research. I think I can benefit from that still a lot. Yeah, and that I would say is my background and how I ended here. I consider myself in pretty much in a sweet spot for me personally, because I'm able to still. It really feels like working for the neuroscience community still, just in a bit of a different part in the chain for producing research output, of course. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Michael. That was a nice overview of your career path so far, and I'm sure people will have questions about the details. So next we would have Shirley, who will give you an overview of her career so far in academia. So over to you, Shirley.
Thank you. So, as Tracy has mentioned, I am currently a postdoc in cognitive neuroscience at Karolinska Institute. I actually did my bachelor's and master's in engineering, and I worked as a consulting engineer for a year, and then I resigned because I realized that it's not for me. I really don't like the repetitiveness, the 9 to 5 grind, the Excel sheets, the need to follow the orders based on the protocols, and things like this. So, and then I was trying to figure out what I really want to do with my life. And a research assistant pops up at my alma mater, and I thought, why not, just to kill some time. And at that time, the psychologist or the psychology student didn't really know how to code. So my engineering background, it's what they need. That's why they are having this research assistant position. And little did I know, I ended up spending 4 years doing research in neuroscience with them, and I love it. That's is also what makes me want to do a PhD in neuroscience or in psychology. So then off to Germany I go for a PhD, doing taste and smell research. During the 4 years I spent in as a research assistant, I was working on decision making, and I wanted to learn something more than that. So I went and do my PhD with taste and smell research, And then I went to France to do my first postdoc, and while I'm here um, at Sweden doing my second postdoc. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Shirley. That's a nice overview of a very different career path to the one that Michael took, which is what we want here. Good, then I will start with some questions from my side. I would like to also learn a little bit more about your jobs. So I would like to know what the best aspect of your job is, and I would go to Shirley first with that question.
Yep. Well, the one thing that you hear often is the flexible hours. But to be honest, I think we ended up putting in more hours. There will be weekends and holidays that we sacrifice. But nevertheless, the one thing that I really, really, really enjoy is that the taste of research freedom. Every day I get to do something new. There's different things to do, different experiments, different questions to answer. So every day it feels like an adventure. It doesn't get boring. And then you get like interesting people you work with. You get to have like this super intellectual discussions with them. You see how they think, and yeah, for me it's the constant learning. You know that there will always be something that you need to learn, like even for EEG, like there will be new techniques, like now the trend is traveling waves or whatsoever, so there are always constant new things that you need to learn. So that's the best thing for me, at least. Yeah.
Okay, and how about you, Michael? What's the best part of your job?
Yeah, that it's a little bit a tough one, I think, at first, because so many things come into mind, but then not everything is great every day. But what everything has in common is that I feel I really like I value to kind of serve the research community still quite a bit. So as working at a manufacturer that produces solutions for the research is I guess that's still me being a researcher in my heart still, and working for that kind of higher goal and for that value which I carry is something which motivates me for every aspect of the job every day, and I think that's the best part. I could
Okay.
name a couple of other things, for example, the international corporations, um, working really as a team in the company with own responsibilities, yes, but really feeling this drive of many people in the company working towards the same goal is a very good experience.
Great, thank you. The next question is for you, Michael, again. What would you consider the biggest challenge when going from academia to industry? And then maybe after Michael's answered, maybe Chris, you could add something from what you've learned as well. So yeah, Michael.
Mm, biggest challenge, well, I guess whenever you change your career path, in this case from academia to industry, um, stepping out of your comfort zone is a challenge, but I guess that's very general in all those changes we talk about. What I find particularly challenging at first was to find my place in the company structure, get to know the company structure, internal processes, because as I mentioned before, a lot of the work is about teamwork, which requires a lot of transparency in your work, documentation, letting people know what you're doing or what you're not doing, and when you're doing it. So knowing who you need to communicate what to whom is very important, and navigating through this in the first couple of months is a challenge, can be a challenge. I would say looking back at it after quite some years here, I would say it's a natural process of the onboarding of anyone coming here. No one expects that right away, but it is something. you would think is might be easy, but it's not all the time.
Yeah. So Chris, have you picked up any themes from people you've interviewed about the challenges?
I guess what I've heard is kind of a reoccurring thing is that, let's say, at an earlier stage, which is, I guess I'll say, two separate parts. One is what kind of what kind of non-academic positions to apply for, and then even if you kind of narrow that down, how to how to present your skills and make your resume look reasonable to someone in that industry. So depending on what kind of research you were doing, how to, in some sense, kind of rephrase or use the vocabulary of the people that you're trying to get hired by, so that they appreciate the skills and experiences that you have. So, like, if the, I guess it's hard. I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example. But let's say you want to go into user experience research. They do experiments. They present things on a screen and then see, do people like this version better than that version, which is related to a lot of kinds of behavioral research, and I guess that may also kind of use EEG or psychophys or eye tracking or a variety of other things on top. But then how to explain what you've done in ways that is basically, in the vocabulary of those people, which I don't have myself, so that's why I'm having trouble giving the more specific example. But that's definitely a kind of sticking point of how to convey what your skills are to people that don't have a PhD, I guess, especially, but might still value and kind of be able to draw on from the experiences that you've had in your own kind of, in the target audience sense of having done their doctorate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you both for your insights there. So I would then ask Shirley the similar question in terms of what are the challenges associated with staying in academia after your PhD?
Well, this is tough, right? Because there are a lot of challenges. But I guess the major one of them all is the career stability. There is this constant pressure to secure a tenured permanent position, and especially currently I'm a postdoc, so a postdoc contract it's always short. It's like 2 to 3 years. Research is slow. By the time you get used to your work, and boom, it's time to pack and move. So it's just not um, mentally good for you, I guess. And then you are most likely have to move across country, because if you choose to stay in a particular country, you are limiting your options. And then again, you need to readapt to the work culture. You need to learn the new languages, and then it's like hitting the reset button every time. So that's a challenge. And then there is the
Yeah.
never ending battle for funding, the constant grant application, and and then there is the supervision, and then you need to brainstorm new research ideas. So it's not all fun, but and it
Yeah.
feels like it it always feels like time is chasing after you, and no matter how fast you run, feels like time is always one step behind you. So there's this time pressure, I'd say.
Yeah.
This is the
All right.
biggest challenge. Yeah.
Totally understand that. We actually have a question from one of our attendees that relates to the point you made first. So the question from Katrina is, what are your long-term goals as a postdoc? So she really enjoys her postdoc work, but is worried about the career trajectory and the limited number of higher positions. So do you already have a plan for staying in academia?
Yes, well, the long-term plan is to secure these professorships, right? That's my plan. But then again, it's limited, and that's why I say that you will have to move across countries, because if you limit yourself within a country, then you're limiting a lot of options. So if you are free to travel, like to the America, within Europe, within Asia, chances to get a professorship, it's, I would say, easier than limiting a professorship at a certain country, especially if you come from uh if you did your PhD or whatsoever in European countries, you are considered exotic in the Southeast Asia university, they would appreciate that. So you're actually standing out in your application because not many foreigners would want to go to Southeast Asia to do a professorship, right? Because then there's a lot of challenges and things like this.
Yeah.
So really we have to weigh your options.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. It's a minefield, I guess.
And also like, but I tend to go step by step. Like before this professorship, there are also things called docent. Like you need to have this docentship in Europe, at least. I know in Germany or in France or in Sweden, you need to have this docentship to be able to teach, to be able to be a professor. So that's the next
Yeah.
step I'm aiming for before that thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for the thorough answer. We've actually got quite a lot of questions coming in, so for all three of you actually. So I'm just going to switch to taking our questions from attendees. So again, a question from Katrina to Michael. So what's the day-to-day of a product manager? So they would really like to hear about the role itself and the kind of tasks you do on a regular basis.
Yeah. Time chases you also here, but maybe on shorter time frames. To describe, well, easy answer would be to say every day is different, but let me try to break it down and generalize a little bit. So, of course, checking emails is one of the things you would typically, I don't know, add one or two blocks each day for answering emails. You have your focus project work. Maybe I should explain a little bit about how product management or what belongs to it, what kind of tasks. So a lot of the work I'm doing or we are doing in the department is making sure the right information is with the right people at the right time. Meaning we are kind of in the middle of the development process and the solutions. So we're interacting with the R&D team and bringing out launching products, which has to be communicated to the sales team. It has to be handed over to the marketing team so they can communicate to the outside world as well. It has to be in the right, so translating this technical information for everyone out there, sales, marketing, but also support teams is quite essential. It's a challenge, but also a lot of fun to take this information and break it down into the required kind of sub information or ways to communicate further. Of course, this information may come back from the market as from the support teams. There might be product feedback, which we then have to translate back. Okay, is it fine to make an improvement here? Should we do it there? Talk to development. What are the challenges there? And then to weigh the arguments back and forth. And if you ask what is the typical day of a product manager, around this you have a lot of meetings, you have a lot of communication calls, spontaneous emails, different kinds of meetings, and one struggle or one challenge is to find your focus time slots to just work on a product and think strategically, think about like create your own ideas and see how you can bring those forward. This also requires some time but is a challenge in all this back and forth.
Yeah.
I think it has to be experienced somehow. But it's great.
I think what I'm getting from both of you is your jobs are not boring, so that's a good thing for sure. So I have a question for you, Chris, quite an interesting one. So have you followed up with students many years later along their career trajectories, and have you noticed any patterns in terms of which careers lead to the most satisfaction?
I guess the short answer is no. So I haven't been a supervisor in a kind of faculty and professor line kind of rolled that many years. I guess partly I'll just give a little bit background of how the first set of interviews came to be. So not that long ago, I was a postdoc and going to conferences and otherwise knew people from my own PhD or then kind of postdoc cohorts, and then came to be supervising my own PhD students and would try and obviously obviously, but like given what I've been doing now, be supportive about different kind of career paths. And then as they would say, like, oh, that's like, let's say they're interested in science communication. Initially, my response was like, okay, I know someone that's gone into that, like, they were a PhD student postdoc when I knew them, like, some years prior, but then as the years have passed, they've gone into different paths of just people I know. So it's like, okay, I know someone that's got into that. I can give you their email and kind of connect you up and you can meet with them. And then over time, I came to think just like the overall idea of that's called an informational interview. And I could do those and follow a kind of structure with it and basically compile these into a set of interviews that then is kind of, I guess, in some sense publicly available so that everyone can benefit from them. And then let's say in some of my lab meetings, we would kind of alternate, let's say once a month, we'd meet weekly, but once a month we'd have it be focused on professional development. And for some of those months, then I guess I would assign initially because that wasn't even published yet. Like, okay, you read this interview and across different lab members, they each read a different interview, and then they had access to the folder of all of them, and then have discussions about like what were some interesting things that they learned from each of those. Now, in the course of doing the first book, I did follow up, I guess, not all of the interviews happened kind of concurrently. I approached some people earlier when it came time to be a book. Then I was like, okay, look things over again. Are you still happy with what you wrote? And in some cases, that was like from initial starting of writing to it almost being published was say about 2 years. And some people did change careers over that time. So especially in those cases, then I asked people like, okay, maybe write an extra kind of follow up section about like what you're doing now and how that career is different than what you were doing before and like why you moved on. But yeah, there wasn't really otherwise a kind of longitudinal component to that. It was more of at the time. Though even then, most of these interviews were conducted over months. So I did it in a shared Google Doc and like ask questions over time rather than it being like, okay, we'll schedule a thing and just do it all today. So that also maybe gives some broader perspectives in them rather than just being what came to mind as we were talking kind of thing. So I don't
Okay.
kind of it, but yeah.
We have another related question actually from Devin that's related to what you've just said, Chris. Have you ever interviewed anybody who worked in industry after a PhD, but then came back to academia after that as a postdoc? Is it possible? Is it feasible? And do you have an impression of how much of an academic break is allowed or is excusable?
So there's 3 people that I've interviewed that did their PhD. I think in some cases did some amount of postdoc and then left and came back and are now in permanent positions. So one of them is in a more teaching focused position. She missed being in more of a teaching role. Other 2 of them are more research focused and have published plenty since. I think the longest that they left for was 2 or 3 years. And I guess that is a thing to be mindful of. And I guess even then, when you wouldn't just pretend like, oh, nothing like anyways. When like in your CV in interviews and kind of returning to academia, then you'd kind of like you'd want to do for industry also, but you recast the skills that you learned in that setting and say how that's helped you develop as a person and like in a professional development sense. And like it's not all about publications then. You account for kind of like this is what you did with that time and how that makes you a better candidate now than someone that just stayed in academia the whole time. So you reframe it that way and definitely is something you can do. I guess just
Yeah.
as a brief thing, there's also some people that I interviewed that went and got assistant professor positions and then left and then decided that I guess they got the I guess one case someone that got the offer and when really considering it decided that's not for them. Another person that was in that role for a few years got grants and it wasn't due to lack of funding, but more at least that's not how he presented it. But was more of just why don't you do something different? So there's
Yeah.
lots of reasons kind of why going back and forth between academia and industry and not just at these kind of earlier points, but also later on either way.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's a good point, that it's okay to change your mind or go back and
Yes.
forth between the two, as long as you make smart decisions about how you present yourself and the skills you've learned. So I think that
Yes.
that's a really good point. Again, on a kind of related point, we have a question for Shirley from Sena. That they say that they always tend to think it's too late now. And because of that, they really admire Shirley, because you're still so young and you've done some transitions already. And they wonder how you convinced yourself to take the risk and resign from your job to go into academia. And how old were you when you did that?
Well, I was a fresh grad, right? I think I was 22, 23,
Mhm.
and I worked a year. Then I realized that, yeah, no, I mean, being a fresh grad, I was ambitious. I have like all my plans laid out. Like I'm gonna set up a consulting firm and things like this, you know. And then when I'm in the consulting business, the firm, I realized that no, I'm not happy. So that I guess my happiness is what drives me to take the risk
Yeah.
to do something out of my comfort zone. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think I'm
Yeah.
mostly driven by what I really want to do and whether I'm happy doing it or not. So yeah,
That
and
sounds like a sensible
I
approach to
actually
me.
look young, but I'm not that young. Yeah.
Just take the compliment.
Yeah. I mean, to take a risk, sure. I actually didn't consider about the risk. You know, I
Hmm.
get this feedback a lot, like from Malaysia.
Hmm.
You just fly to Germany and you just do a PhD like this. Like, don't you have like fear or whatsoever? At
Yeah.
that time, I felt like I wasn't, I guess I was really naive. I was really, really stupid in the sense that I didn't even think about all this risk, the so-called risk. What is risk? I don't know what is risk. All I was thinking about is that no, I need to go out. I need to experience
Mhm.
new things. I want to experience new things. I want to take the challenge. I want to get out
Yeah.
from my comfort zone.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
realized that 4 years being doing research assistant 4 years in a lab, you kind of feel like bored, and then like no, I want
Hmm.
something new. So then I just do it. So yeah, I guess.
Good.
Oh,
I think that's good advice. So thank you. Okay, a question for Michael from Gary. Does the role as product manager scratch the itch between being involved in extending knowledge in research as well as having a technical skill? And the second part is, do you think that sweet spot in between is few and far between? So are you just lucky, I guess?
I'm just lucky. Yeah, it's easy to say. I'm just lucky. But look, if I look back to my career path, I did set everything up. It feels like to end up here for now at least.
Mhm.
I've always followed what interests me the most. I think this is
Mhm.
important for me to keep up the motivation. I perform very poorly if I'm not motivated.
Yeah.
So it's important to me to find that. Um, but of course, I guess a little bit of luck also is always included.
Yeah.
Um, but as I said before, I followed what really interested me. So I used my studies to find this. Maybe I was lucky to find something I liked. Maybe it could also have been something else. But it would
Mhm.
also always have to been this path. So I
Mhm.
was after I finished my degree, I felt that this wasn't enough. I wanted to know much more about it. So research was that thing for me, and I so much enjoyed it. I also spent a lot of time doing my PhD. It was not the regular 3, 4 years. It was more like
Mhm.
8 years, which could have been much faster. But I was also involved in so many international projects and corporations, and was able to travel a lot and so on. So I made the
Mhm.
most out of that. Um,
Yeah.
but then it was a conscious decision to look around and really see what these are great tools. It's fun to use them, and enables me and the whole community to do whatever we do as researchers. And then it came rather naturally that to look out for, okay, what is behind it? How do these products come to life? And
Yeah.
that's why I made
Yeah.
them.
And would you really have the impression that jobs like yours are few and far between? Or is there a lot of them out there? You just need to look for them.
What is a lot? I don't know. I think there's more than professorships.
Yeah. Okay. It's a good
I would say.
comparison.
Um, but of course, I also didn't start as a product manager, and I might also not have been able to start as a product manager. It was a good introduction into industry to work in the even more closely related, at least in the interaction with directly interacting with the researchers in the support team, helped a lot to grow in this company structure, processes, how we think as a company. It is a bit different, and that was also part of it.
Okay. Makes sense.
I hope I
Okay.
was able to answer the question. I know it
Yeah.
didn't like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a good answer. So I have a question that's for all three of you. So
Mhm.
maybe we'll take Chris first on this. If you could pick three transferable skills that would be important to highlight for a non-academic job search, what would you pick?
Okay, I think I'll give some answer, but I feel like an individual might want to pick more based off of their own, obviously, kind of strengths and interests, and
Mhm,
not like these three are the answers that everyone should give. I guess depending on, again, kind of what you're actually doing in your PhD and that sort of thing. So I guess
mhm,
data science and kind of working with data, being able to change things between different formats and somehow figure out we have this problem, how to make a data give you some sort of thing that answers it is one thing.
mhm,
Um, Somewhat separate from that, I'll say, is scientific literacy. So understanding research that someone else did and figure out how that could be applied within a context that the business or whatever kind of actually cares about. But then I guess kind of maybe with that literature review and that sort of thing of like, okay, like let's say in a policy situation, what's known about this and in from the literature and how can we maybe change what should be done. So it's not so much the work you did it yourself then, but more of thinking about data. And then otherwise figuring out, I guess these all are kind of maybe adjacent ideas, but how to communicate those sorts of ideas outwards. So just because you understand it, that's great. But calibrating what you explain to someone based off of what level of expertise that they have and would want to get out of it. So that's
mhm,
definitely a thing that hopefully you learn through a PhD is if you go the people how you talk about your research to people in your lab relative to how you talk about it, let's say when you talking to your parents and hopefully they have some interest in what you're doing, you definitely have to calibrate and adjust while you do that. And that I guess maybe these are general skills after all, despite my saying I'm not going to do that at the start of this. Hopefully, those are things that people have learned in their PhD. Something with kind of working with data yourself, how to understand stuff that other people have done, and how to communicate that to a more lay audience or calibrate
yeah,
regardless. Yeah.
good. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Shirley, how about you? What would your three transferable skills be?
Well, I would agree with what Chris said, but I would also add problem-solving skills because in research, you often need to solve a problem, right? To answer a question. It
Mhm,
can be technical aspect, it can be um, literature-based, whatever. So the problem-solving skills is actually very, very important. And also how to present your data, your findings to
mhm,
the audience. Because I think in industry you usually need to communicate with your clients, right? And they are often not a very technical experts, so you need to tell that in a very simple layman's term. So yeah,
mhm.
that's
Okay.
something you learn because when you go to conferences, there will be people who are not within your field. So you need to
Mhm.
explain to them in a way that they can understand. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. For sure, they are good skills to have. And Michael, anything to add to the skills that Chris and Shirley have already mentioned?
Would also agree to all of them. I would again mention communication is one thing. I think the way researchers communicate within their community is very different to what is required in industry. And also proving that you can communicate in an industry relevant way is something important in the end, because just claiming that you can because you have talked at conferences doesn't mean that it's applicable for industry, I would say. So even taking courses may help, and may also help your research, in fact. Another thing is definitely project management skills. And here I not only mean the time management, but also work packaging, work package definition, milestones, and also the ability to say no and set a stop for certain aspects of the project to make it most efficient. This is required in industry. It's very essential in industry, but may also even again help for your research career.
Yeah.
The third one would be maybe looking at what tools you're using and if and how they're used in industry, and bring that to a professional level. So just because you used Excel or MATLAB doesn't mean that you're a professional in that. Also, if you know how to code MATLAB, doesn't necessarily mean that you're interested for a software development role where C# or C++ is required. It's a very different game. So taking those skills that you may have or just started to develop and bring it to a professional level would be another thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, all three of you. I think they are excellent skills to be working on. We have another question here. This is from Devu, and it's for Michael and Christopher, but I think we could also extend it to Shirley, but just for academia rather than industry. So the question is, how would you recommend a PhD student transfers to industry to land a job? So for example, networking or rewriting the academic CV, do you recommend any specific steps or timelines for this? So this is specifically from academia to industry, but Shirley, you could answer it in the opposite direction. So maybe if we start with Michael for the industry side.
So how would I? Sorry, can you maybe rephrase?
Yeah.
So
So how would you recommend that a PhD student transitions to industry? So what should they be doing? Things like networking or rewriting the CV for different jobs?
Yeah, networking is a great start. I mean, ideally as a researcher, you every now and then go to a conference, and very often there's also a small exhibition around that. That's a great chance to find related companies. If you look outside, there's also opportunities, I guess. Maybe you have to be a bit more creative for that. But generally, companies are interested in talking to potential employees, and I mean, what's the risk of talking to them? Then I think, find job offers and browse through what is required, what is listed as a requirement there, and then see how it matches your profile and what it takes to match it in the end. It's fine to have gaps in there. Everyone wants to learn, and also the companies are interested in that, in those gaps, because you might also bring something in addition. So it's not about 100% match always, but of course, finding something concrete, and then again, what I said before, it's a different thing if you're able to prove something rather than just claiming a skill. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, Shirley, what would your advice be for somebody who is looking to stay in academia? What kind of things should they be doing or steps should they take?
Well, I think my answer does not only apply to people who wants to stay in academia, but also wants to transition to industry, because during a PhD, you will learn a certain sets of skills, especially technical skills, right? Programming, data science analysis and things like this. And these are applicable in industry as well. It's not just for academia. So again, like conferences are actually a great spot to find your next job because you talk to the PIs.
Yeah.
Sometimes the labs are having during the presentations, people will say like, "Oh, our lab is looking for postdocs, so keep your eye out." And there will always be those industrial booths set up in conferences. So if
Yeah.
you're interested, just go up and talk to them and see what they're doing and things like this. You never know who you meet and the opportunities that will arise from that situation. So
Yeah. Yeah.
networking, I would say.
Yeah, it is an important one. And Chris, anything to add from what you've learned from people for either of the directions, for industry, academia, or just in general?
So I feel like the industry one's the harder one because it's a lot broader what it is. So academia, I think the steps in the career path are a bit clearer. How well a person knows how well they can do those is a bit nebulous itself. But industry is so many things. So I feel like I guess I agree with everything that's been otherwise said. But I think part of let's say an earlier stage of I guess networking and talking to people in different kind of possible paths is definitely good. But before applying, need to narrow the what kind of position do you want to go for? Is it somewhere, let's say, where programming is more relevant, or is it somewhere that's more about scientific literacy and you're reading other people's research, but not working with data yourself too much? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things that will relate to kind of which set of your PhD kind of skills are more relevant, and some things are more kind of generic in again understanding research is well, everyone who finished a PhD should be able to do. But yeah, figuring out what direction you want, and part of that might be talking to some of the people at the conference, like when networking, and get a bit more insight in what their job entails. Or again, I give a singular company still has many different roles within it, but figuring out what kind of a position you want is, I think, the first main
Yeah.
hurdle of just what is industry to you in a career path kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we still have a few minutes left. We still have some questions, so I'm just going to keep going. We are skewed a little bit more towards industry than academia, which is interesting. I wasn't sure which way our audience would be leaning. So this is another question for Michael from Elena. What were the most important criteria that influenced your decision to go from academia to industry?
Hmm.
It's a tough
Well,
one.
first of all, everything what Shirley answered on the question of what is a challenge. So yeah, the job security, the outlook on the career path. There's only so many options. Personal stability in terms of relocating. I very much agree to the point that you have to look. I mean, in Europe, maybe we are already lucky because we have many countries around us. On the other hand, it's still a travel and it's still relocation and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there were a couple of aspects I wasn't too motivated about, like the teaching aspect, the writing of papers, not my greatest talent, I would say. So I think that it was a mix of many things that are required and very important in research. Yeah.
Okay. Good. I think we'll take one last question. It is addressed for Michael for industry, but again, we could also approach it from Shirley's perspective. So, what would you suggest for creating an appealing CV for industry? So, what are people in industrial jobs looking for in terms of criteria? And then we would flip that around for Shirley after your answer.
Yeah, a couple of things I think I've already mentioned. Trying to be as concrete as possible with your skills, and make sure it's not only by doing the research. So, for example, project management. Everyone doing a PhD, I would say, does project management. But also, Chris mentioned something important. Knowing the terminology around that helps a lot afterwards in industry. So taking this to a professional level will help because it will allow you to state in your CV, I did my project according to this and that project management framework, and therefore I have the experience. And this also translates to the job interview, where you can even show that you're capable of doing this. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't have to be a 100% match. See what you can bring as extras. Look out for what you bring in terms of value to the company. But it should go both ways, I think. I really believe. Yeah, and then again, be concrete and state the facts.
Yeah, great. And Shirley, how about a CV for academia? What would you emphasize for people to do?
Well, I think CV aside, what's more important is your cover letter, because
Good point. Yeah.
that's where you frame your skills, where it's
Mhm.
applicable for the jobs that you're applying to. Like in today's academic landscape, interdisciplinary research is becoming the norm, right? So your skills may intersect with other disciplines, which provides you an advantage. So use that skill and try to turn it around where it fits other people's project. So, so your cover letter should emphasize on what you know and how it will fit into other people's team.
Yeah,
So
that's really
yeah.
good advice. Yeah, and I think that's quite a nice question to end on. We've had a few questions. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to the questions. There's just a couple of things I would like to conclude with. Before we thank our speakers and let them get on with their day in their various academic and non-academic jobs. First of all, I really would like to just point you to Chris's books again. So this is a really valuable resource, and it does give you a lot of information on the academic and industry jobs, and covers questions like the ones that Michael and Shirley have so kindly answered for us today. So I will start with a question that both Shirley and Michael could answer, and I will start with Shirley. So what's the best aspect of your current job?
Well, the one thing that I heard often from my peers who is not in academia is that about the flexible hours, right? You can go have coffee or tea at 3 p.m. Nobody cares. But to be honest, I feel like we ended up spending a lot more, putting in a lot more hours, and the weekends that we have to sacrifice to catch up on work and things like this. But that aside, the so-called flexible hours aside, the one thing that I really, really enjoy, and that's the reason why I'm still staying in academia, is the research freedom. The research questions may be well defined by your supervisor, the job that you are hired for, but how you approach it, how you tackle the problem, how you come up with a solution, that's entirely on you. You have the freedom to do whatever you want to do with it as long as it's within the topic. So every day you are learning something new, every day you're doing something different, every day feels like an adventure. It doesn't, for me, I don't get bored at work. And I'm constantly learning, so that's what I love most about my job.
Great, that's a very nice answer. What about you, Michael? What's the best aspect of your job?
I think the best aspect, besides that, I find motivation in basically almost all tasks. Not every time I do them, but um, often enough. I think what all these have in common is, or as a base layer, I would say, is my intrinsic motivation and seeing a lot of value in what I'm working for, which is still the research community, I would say, neuroscience research community, by by shaping and helping to design those products and solutions for researchers to carry out their research. This is something I really value a lot and find my motivation with. And this makes me go to work every day and find my motivation also for tasks which at first may not seem too exciting, but of course that also belongs to any job, I guess. Um, Apart from that, working for brand products today allows me to interact internationally with many cooperation partners, still researchers, going to conferences. We have exhibitions there, so we talk to the people, which is great. We also talk in that language still, which I very much enjoy. But it changes a little bit if you go away from research. Um, and what I also want to mention is probably the teamwork, which is a really great feeling. If you have your own responsibility, and of course you have to work within your scope, but the feeling that many colleagues of you, we are all as a team working towards one goal is a very great feeling, and
Yeah.
that's what I like a lot about my job.
Great, sounds good. I have a question for you, Michael, that maybe Chris can also contribute to as well after you've answered. So what was the biggest challenge for you when going from academia to industry?
Yeah, besides leaving a comfort zone, something which you know and feels okay, I guess is always a challenge when you do any change in life. But besides that, what I find particularly challenging coming from university into a company is the finding my place in the structure, specific structure in the company, getting to know the internal processes, which basically translate to when and to whom should I talk and do I need to ask and so on. This can be quite challenging at first. Looking back at it, I think it's a very normal thing to have this onboarding phase and this getting to know the company phase. And after that, it's all again, it's fine. But at the beginning, it's quite different.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And Chris, have you got any experience you could share based on talking to so many people about the challenges going from academia to industry?
I think I guess there's two main ones. First is what kind of sector within industry, what kind of role to look for, because industry is so broad and so varied. And then in some case, regardless of what the answer to that first one will be, is then figuring out how to kind of position the skills that you had in a way that the person that's interviewing you, or however the application process works, to that they'll understand and appreciate the skills that you have. So in different sectors, they'll have in some sense different vocabularies for maybe the same kind of tasks that you've been doing. So you might need to kind of relabel what you think like designing an experiment is and doing let's say survey research or different other types of things that you might be doing as a PhD student or whatever role within academia, and figuring how to kind of best present the skills that you already have, but convey that to someone, especially if the people on the other side haven't done a PhD, don't haven't done research in this sort of way, but again, could benefit from those skills. So the hard part of kind of translating between what you know and what they'll kind of understand of your skills is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you both for the answers. So, Shirley, I would ask you a similar question. So, what are the challenges associated with staying in academia after your PhD?
Um, too many, too many that actually drive people out of academia. I think the biggest one of them all is the career stability, right? The one that, the pressure to secure a permanent position when you started as a postdoc, especially, um, it's the research is slow. Your contract is short. By the time you get comfortable with your work, then it's time to go. Your contract ends. It's time to move. And the thing is that you typically will have to move across countries, because if you choose to stay in a particular countries, then you're limiting your options. But then that comes with a lot of external baggages. You have to readapt to the culture. You have to learn the whole new language to to be familiar with your team, your work, how your team works, the lab works, and things like this. So every time you move countries, every time you start a new position, a postdoc position or whatsoever, you are hitting the reset button every time. So I guess that it's very, very challenging. And on top of that, because you're an early career researcher, then there's this never-ending battle for funding, grant applications, and so forth and so on. So yeah, it always feels like you're short on time, and the time is always ticking. I can hear it like in my head. I'm hearing it tick, click, ticking like mad. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, I understand that completely. I don't miss those things from academia myself.
yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Chris? What have you learned from interviewing people about the difficulties of staying in academia?
Yeah, the main thing is finding a position, and then let's say if you, even if you do secure that, then funding to do the research you want to do, like depending on which
Mm.
stage you go along the way. I guess one thing that's a little bit broader, but kind of answer this too, is I've like from my own experience as well as from interviewing, but as you go through different stages within academia, the expectations keep changing. So first you need to do some analyses, and that's great. And then shifts a bit broader, but maybe not that different about writing. Like skill wise is different, but sure. But then I'm being told like not worry about publishing so much. You have to work on getting grants. So then, anyways, as you go, and especially if you go in more kind of management roles within a university, then afterwards, like someone is the department chair, head of school, whatever, different places have different names, but the expectations keep changing as you go along it. It's not just academia's one kind of stationary set of roles. It keeps changing, and that even if you do get through the first hurdles, that's a thing to contend with. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, it's tough, rewarding but tough. Yeah. So thank you all for your answers. I'm going to take some questions from our participants. So the first one I'm going to take is from Marisa. First of all, she says thank you all for the contributions and the experiences you've shared. So yeah, from all of us, thank you. And that's a good point. And the question is for everybody. So maybe Shirley, you could take this first, and then we'll go on to Michael and Chris. So, what practical advice would you give to those who are still in the midst of their PhD journey and are unsure about what they want to do?
Finish your PhD first. Right? Maybe just but stay focused. But I think whether or not, don't think about whether you want to stay in academia or going to industry. I think what's important is to stay focused and try,
Oh,
because
just
you are only a
any.
PhD student.
We seem to be losing
Mistakes
Shirley's
as possible.
audio.
Sorry?
We're losing your audio, Shirley, so we keep missing some of your answer.
Right.
So
So I was saying that, do you hear me better now?
we hear you now. Yeah, yeah, all
Okay.
good.
So I was saying that you're in your learning phase, right? So it's okay to make mistakes. Make as many mistakes as possible, because you have your supervisor to cover your mistakes. And take this opportunity to learn as many technical skills as possible to really get that coding, do that programming course, yeah, that's that. Instead of thinking, because all these skills are transferable, whether you want to go to academia or industry, it will be applicable, the technical skills.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And how about you, Michael?
Yeah, keep focused on your PhD. I think that's a great advice. Apart from that, I would say if you're not sure which way to go, I think it doesn't hurt at all. Quite the opposite. It will help a lot, I think, to trying to incorporate as many professional working styles into your project. So, for example, apply a project management framework onto your project, and um, and maybe take a communication course to be able to better present your research results. It will definitely help for your application and to later on translate your skills and prove it to those in industry. But I'm pretty sure it will also help for your research project to make it even more efficient, to better communicate your results, to get people motivated for your results and for your research that you're doing. So it will help anyway, no matter which way in the end you will go. I think that would be my advice. I think I might be a better researcher. I would be a better researcher now if I would turn back to academia with those skills learned in the past years in industry.
Interesting. And Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
So those are definitely good points, and I guess I'd say while still in the PhD, but towards the end, or like anyways, ongoing, think about which parts you like more. So, or like relative kind of sense, like how much do you like programming, how much do you like kind of the problem solving and research question, and like kind of designing a study. How much do you like the actual like writing up, making the kind of report and the publication afterwards? All of those different things are reasonably different skill sets, and I guess even within academia, work is becoming increasingly collaborative. You can find ways to focus on the ones you like more, and let someone else, hopefully the project, take on the parts that you like a bit less, and it all gets done collaboratively. But also then in terms of kind of if you were to go into a non-academic position, it could at least be more purely one of those, let's say, different set of skills, and then that helps give you some guide of what kind of thing to look for. So some students that I've worked with really don't like reading the literature and writing, but really love the analysis and that kind of problem solving, whereas some are very much the opposite. And at least that is, I guess, hopefully then a thing that you can also discuss with your supervisor and maybe have some opportunities that help you build the portfolio that sort of way. So maybe something outside of the PhD, that supervisor has other research projects, and you do some analysis that's a little bit overly complex, but don't have to worry about the background literature. That's someone else's role. And then that could be a thing that, let's say, you, I guess, with approval of everyone involved, put on GitHub and have as kind of a code portfolio, like look at the things that I've done. And you'd be middle author on that. It's not part of your PhD, but that's a thing that you did. And in other cases, if it's more about writing, doing lit review or perspective kind of papers that are more writing focused, or writing kind of as the role within a project that someone else is doing more of the programming side. And then again, maybe it doesn't count for the PhD given kind of expectations of how much you contribute to it kind of solely, but is stuff that you get more experience in. Even otherwise, if you're not sure, kind of can sample in a safe environment and like take it on, becomes overwhelming, becomes too much given the PhD itself, can more safely kind of step back at a point, and then supervisor can reassign that to someone else or figure that otherwise. But then have this ability to sample things a little bit more or less beyond kind of otherwise meeting the PhD requirements. So there's
Yeah.
ways to kind of sample things and again figure out what skills more resonate with your interests.
Okay, sounds good. I think that's very good advice from all three of you. Um, So we have a question from Fariha, and they ask, do you think it's ever too late to rejoin academia? So they've been 1 year out from the PhD and still struggling to find a foothold in the career, and wondering if coming back to the postdoc world would be okay, or if the window has been missed. So yeah, maybe yeah, Michael, could you take that, given that maybe you would consider it? I don't know. Being further out.
Well, I won't consider it, but since I made the statement, I guess I guess I need to back it up. Um, I think it wouldn't be too late for me. No, No, especially not going back to academia, especially not that way around, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
And Shirley, would you have anything to add on making that step back again into academia?
No, I think 1 year is fine. 5 years is also okay. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I think in Germany there's this 12-year limit, so but it's all very it
Yeah, it
depends
may
on
be.
which country and things like this. But 1 year
Yeah.
is definitely fine. As long as it's less than 5 years, I think it's not a problem to go back. You
Yeah.
wouldn't miss out a lot.
Right.
Research is
Right.
slow, so you're
Yeah.
not missing out a lot.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chris, have you interviewed anybody who's done that? So left academia and then gone back again.
Yeah, so there's 3 or 4 people that I interviewed that had left, in that case, it was more of we're in academia, left to an industry position, found out that
Hmm.
that just wasn't a good fit for them for a variety of reasons, like again, varies across people, and then came back to academia. I think definitely within 2-3 years is not really a problem, and as I already kind of said, I guess think how long it takes from starting a project to finishing it in your own academic work. Stuff takes time. And I
Yeah.
guess especially if, let's say, you joined a lab and can be part of a project that was already started while you were out, then you didn't really miss out that much.
Mhm.
It's more about kind of thinking of what you want, and hopefully not kind of satisficing, but finding something that more makes you passionate about what you want, like about what the role is.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that makes
definitely not a
sense.
thing to worry too much about in itself.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Okay, our next question is about academia. So this would be for Shirley and maybe also Chris to comment on, but we'll take Shirley first. So a question from Eduardo, which is actually quite an interesting one. So he would like to continue in academia and enjoys teaching, but research is the main passion. So in your experience, how much time and resources does teaching drain away from your research in academic positions?
Well, in my first postdoc, I didn't have any teaching position. It's mainly research. But then if you want to stay in research, if you want to stay in academia, the long-term career goal is to be a prof, then you will have to have that teaching credit hours for sure. But I haven't been teaching. So, but I should start. So yeah, I mean, it depends on which institute you are from and which university you are from, because at Karolinska, it's very much focused on research. So they will hire specific lecturers just to teach. So they wouldn't ask researchers to teach unless you want to. So it really depends on which universities and which institute you're working with.
I guess yeah,
Okay.
definitely resonating most of that. So like there are some places that are research institutes. They have, let's say, PhD programs and are kind of are affiliated with a more full kind of university. But then people in those, like in that research institute positions, don't have any undergraduate teaching. Just that's just how the thing works.
But like
So you
for
definitely are kind of.
Karolinska, sorry.
I was just going to say it's more kind of limiting what set of institutes you're kind of looking for, but
Mhm.
they definitely have those kind of some places are more focused on different roles. And at least let's
Yeah.
say in my own department here in Nottingham, we have 3 different tracks of for faculty. Some that are more teaching focused, some that are kind of a mix, and that's what I'm in, and some that are kind of more research focused. In that one,
Mhm.
then you're expected to partly be paying your salary from research grants, so it is more dependent on that. But then the grant is also more directly funding your time. Whereas my own position is kind of officially supposed to be a third teaching, a third research, a third committees and other administrative things, and then 10% is more flexible things for like more citizenship with like outreach and reviewing and being on different committees for societies. So then even within a specific location, they have it's increasingly an option that there's different kind of tracks within it that are more administrative in some sense of like which one you're in, but the job title's the same. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really nice overview from both of you. I think there's a common perception that going into academia means that you have to teach, but there are tracks available for also continuing with your research. So that's really useful information. Yeah, okay. Our next question is from Metin. And first of all, thank you all very much for your talks. This is about academic adjacent jobs. So I think maybe this one's for you, Chris, and maybe Michael, you could add something afterwards.
Mhm.
So, what channels or ways of networking would you advise those looking for academic jobs or academic adjacent jobs to take? So, things such as scientific support, scientific communication, science management. Because it's not so common to see these open positions on things like LinkedIn. So, how would you advise somebody finds these things?
I feel like in a lot of cases, the sort of companies that would be hiring those sorts of roles are the people who are exhibitors in like the poster hall or whatever at a conference. So I think that's the general thing to do is talk to the people who are the exhibitors there, and obviously I guess first would be like whatever the product is a bit, and then I guess especially if that is going to be a company you'll be working at, but then also after a little bit in there, then try and ask them a bit more about their own job and what kind of roles there are there. Because even let's say the person you're talking to is maybe more of, in some sense, a more sales kind of oriented role, but then there could be, I guess, let's say if it's more something like, say, brain products, some people kind of in other offices of the building, but not at the conference, might be the ones who are actually more in terms of, let's say, developing new software and the other kind of aspects that go with that kind of overall kind of direction.
Mm,
So talk to the person who's at the exhibit and find out more about what the company is, what sort of roles. Like they'll have some idea of what their colleagues do, and then you can kind of get some idea of is that something that you're interested in. And then in other cases, and I guess in some of the other people that I've interviewed, so like there is the job of being a full-time journal editor. So usually you need to do a postdoc after that, but some people, the editors and editor in chief, sometimes are a part time thing that they do alongside being an academic. There's a few instances where someone's in industry but really likes being involved in the academic kind of situation, and then still involved in, let's say, running at least the instance I'm thinking right now is a more software oriented journal. And other times, like let's say with Nature, then I'm pretty sure all of the editors for Nature, at the very least most of them, that's their full time role. And then again, they would have an exhibit at some conferences. So the main thing might be going to conferences that are big enough that there's a few exhibitors, because that kind of scales with the conference size. But try
mm,
and add supervisor, whoever else is involved, to have you go to bigger conferences rather than ones that might be useful for having the kind of community of researchers that are nearby and more smaller conferences, but then yeah, give you more opportunities for networking and seeing where your career might go later.
right.
Yeah.
Good advice. And Michael, anything to add to that? How would somebody go about networking to find these kind of jobs?
Yeah, that conference exhibitions I think is a good starting point.
Mm,
Maybe to add, I would say an idea could be to look, well, for any company making such products or services, offering such services as a product, and really dive into the job descriptions also. Maybe sometimes they have
mhm,
like descriptions of current projects and so on. Also, manufacturer of medical devices, especially large organizations, um, often have R&D departments which do quite basic research even before they invest in research before they then come out with a product. That could also be an opportunity. But I agree, it's not always easy to identify those positions because they sometimes hide behind a job title that might not directly
mhm,
point to it. With brain products, very often we have a job description called scientific consultant. That may be in sales, it could be in marketing, could be in support, and we want to emphasize with that in each of those departments you will benefit from the specific expertise in the field of EEG research um, for
yeah.
the job. So that's one way. But also just look at the job description, try to read between the line, and what is it that is created, and again, the R&D departments, especially in big organizations, is a good starting point.
Yeah, good. We have a question that's very much related to what you've just been saying. I'm sorry, Shirley, it's industry again, but we will come back to you before the end. We're skewed towards industry with the questions. Yeah, so the question is that somebody, so this is a question from Enya, and she's looking for positions in industry at the moment, but is a bit struggling with the job titles. So what kind of jobs can you apply for with a PhD? So the examples are senior scientist, team leader, specialist, that it's not always clear what these jobs are. So I think, Michael, you already made a nice point that sometimes the title is not always indicative of what the job is and to really read the description. But in terms of searching for these kind of jobs, would you, Michael and Chris, have any advice on what kind of job titles to look for? Maybe start with Michael.
The job titles that you read out are quite fitting already, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a tough one, because I know these job platforms where you search for job titles. If that doesn't give you the results you think you should be getting, maybe start again the other way around and look for the manufacturers, look for the companies that produce what you're looking for, and then through that get to know the terminology and what kind of positions they're looking for, and then maybe try to put that in the search engine, and maybe that gives you the results that I need. Sorry that I can't give you more concrete results. I know the problem. It is sometimes hard. But it's a little bit about it's like doing a research, like a paper research on your search engines. Sometimes you have to be a bit creative in what terms you you put it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
Anything to
Chris
add?
has some further ideas.
Yeah, I guess this is very similar to the issue that I was commenting on earlier about kind of in some sense, the jargon, or at least the different vocabulary used in different sectors relative to what you're doing in your PhD. This is almost kind of the inverted version of it. That to them, that's a sensible job title, and then you need to figure out what it means. And then even if you had, like, if we could just give you a list and say, here's like a one-to-one of like this means something in a more academic sense, you still wouldn't, with just that, you still wouldn't do good in an interview, because then you need to know how to convince them that you have the right skills. So title is the first thing, but then it takes some homework to figure out. And I think part of the answer would be going to, again, like at an exhibit, talking to some of the people that work there and see what sort of roles that, let's say, that, like the person you're talking to, what sort of roles do they have? Or again, other people in the company that might not be at the conference itself, but figure out a bit about some things that are kind of more tractable to you. And I guess otherwise, I would give a better answer if I could, but somewhat self-servingly, I would say maybe the interviews that I've done will help get you there. Because at least part of the approach that I took then was I asked everyone to talk a little bit about what their own PhD was in, and then what's their current job. And in some cases, people had some intermediate positions, and then that was a thing we discussed as well. So then that might also give you some insight of the not just like where they are now and kind of jargon of title, but what skills were relevant and how they transitioned. And in some cases, like for instance, let's say data science, did some kind of additional kind of workshops or training beyond the PhD to be able to go and be an intern or otherwise secure the position. They had to do some other steps in the middle, and that'll help kind of also give some idea of how that path can be bridged across. But it'll also vary by sector as part of the difficulty here. It's not just this is the secret word to look for, but it's not just one answer.
Yeah, yeah, it's a difficult thing to search these engines properly and find the right jobs. But I think the advice you both gave will definitely be helpful. So we have time for one more question. It's actually a very interesting question, and I think all of you could answer it. I think we'll go to Shirley first. So this is a question from Renata, and she thanks you all for your talks because she's just finished her PhD, so this is very timely for her. And the question is, how do you deal with burnout? And is it hard for you to maintain a work-life balance? I think we've all been there at the end of a PhD, so I guess now is the time to decide where you want to go. So yeah, Shirley, how about you?
Having a support system, your friends, your family, that's a great help. They will pull you out from your miserable moments. I find that most helpful. You there will be days that you don't feel like going out, but they will drag you out. So having that support system is very important.
Yeah,
Otherwise, if you somehow don't have anyone, take a break from technology or whatever, just go travel, do something, go explore a new country. That would also help. It doesn't even have to be a new country, right? It can be
right.
anywhere in that country you're in. Explore a new area and things like this. Do sports, run, swim, whatever. That really helps.
Yeah, it's good advice. And Michael?
Yeah, those are my strategies as well. I would say, uh, yeah, uh, family traveling sports is great. Um, Allow yourself some time away and make the experience that it's not too bad to stay away for, like, take that holiday. It's fine. Also learn to say no and learn to see that saying no is not always has a bad consequence on your career or your responsibilities of task and so on. It's not always that. Um,
Yeah,
that would be
that's
my.
excellent advice. And Chris, anything to add to what Shirley and Michael have
I
said?
think most of that covered, but I guess I'll say a thing that's in some ways easier than traveling or otherwise being more active where you might just feel exhausted is, in a general sense, try and find something that's fun that's sufficiently different than research. So, like, reading could be a thing, playing computer games is something that's a different mindset and that, yeah, gets you out of focusing on that set of things for a bit and then come back
Yeah.
to it later. And ideally, when you're not burnt out anymore.
Yeah, that's really great advice from all of you. Thank you. So we have perfectly timed this. We've just run out of questions and we are just a couple of minutes over time. So we will stop there.